Here is an author in their element, having some fun with their craft, delivering some of the best combat scenes I've read lately.
That never wanders far from my mind.
I think that this might be one of the single best representations of dragons that I've read in the fantasy genre.
This book is a dark, fascinating, disgusting, wonderful, nauseating, intriguing, effed up, heartfelt, brutal character study
that recaptures the magic of far-flung galaxies, grand ideas, and more.
There's so much this book gets right. Like any good map, you're aware of the destination it's leading you towards, but the way it takes you there is very pretty indeed.
An all-consuming dreamscape, the likes of Poe Morpheus.
It's a neo-retro futuristic fest. Alien menaces guns like those tar.
Hello, and welcome to the SPFBO 8 finalist panel for TBRCon2023. My name is Tyra. I'm on the FanFiAddict team, as well as on the Before We Go blog team for SPFBO 8. Happy to be here. I'm going to kick it to all of our panelists, introduce yourself, what have you entered in SPFBO, and we'll start with Olivia to my right.
Oh, I love that I was first. Thank you so much for that. Hi, I'm Olivia Atwater. I am, as I mentioned to the other panelist, half coffeeed today. I wrote Small Miracles, which I entered into SPFBO. And I did not expect it to make it this far, but apparently the stranger my life gets and the more disasters happen, the better my reviews get. So please stop giving me good reviews, judges, so that my life can steady out a little bit. Anyway, on to Quenby while I drink the rest of my coffee.
I am Quenby Olson. I am the author of Miss Percy's Pocket Guide to the Care and Feeding of British Dragons. Like Olivia, I did not think it was going to get this far. I had entered SPFBO before years back, and that was cut in the first round with a very good review, but it was a very tight group. And so I threw Miss Percy in thinking, it'll just, it might, maybe make it to semifinalist or something. So when it made it this far, I was very shocked, but pleased and absolutely honored to be in all of this company here. So I am now going to throw it to the next person.
Yes,
Alec.
My name is Alec Hutson. I'm the author of The Umbral Storm. This is the third time I've entered into SPFBO, my second time as a finalist. I have woken up for this panel because I'm on the opposite side of the world from most people. So if I am ramblingly incoherent, I apologize. But I'm very excited to be here and looking forward to it.
Is it me?
It's you.
Okay. I'm Thiago Abdalla. I'm the author of The Ashes of Averin. The book that I entered into SPFBO is A Touch of Light, which is book 1. It also has the prequel novella, Prelude to Ashes, and released this week. I still don't have a copy because, like Alec, I'm not on the other side of the world, but I live in Brazil and stuff takes forever to get here. So I have it on my iPod, but you might have seen this griffin kind of flying around. And I'm super excited to be here as well. This is my first time entering SPFBO. This is my debut novel, so I'm absolutely blown away that I've gotten this far, but I'm super happy to be here with everyone.
Hi, I'm Trudie Skies, the author of The 13th Hour, which is book 1 of The Cruel Gods. This is also my first time in SPFBO, and honestly, I expected Rob Hayes to beat me, so I'm sorry, Rob. You do have better hats than I do. You really do have better hats. So, yeah.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Burgis. I'm the author of Scales and Sensibility. This is my second time entering SPFBO. I actually entered a few years ago with a novella, really. It was sort of cheating because it was right on the edge. It was officially, I think by the rules of word count, it was a novel, but it was really kind of a long novella. So it got to semi-finalist and everyone said, they've said very nice reviews, but they said this isn't really a novel. And I was like, yeah, you're really right. So this time I brought an actual full-length novella to the party and I'm very happy to be here.
All right, Tanny. Perhaps the beer's frozen? Was that just me?
Yeah.
No.
Coming back slowly.
She moved. Oh, wait.
Yeah.
She flinched.
Okay. I think she's back.
Have we moved on to me? Sorry, I think
yes,
the
we have.
connection is not great right now.
No worries.
My name's T.A. Hernandez. My name is Tanny, actually, but I just write under my initials. The book I entered this year was Coveted Spirits. It's a YA fantasy novel, and this is my second time entering SPFBO, so I also was not expecting to get very far in this competition, but here we are, and I'm happy to be here.
I'm sensing a theme.
Yeah, there was a little bit of a theme. I tried to look up if folks had entered before, but it's kind of hard to weed through 300 entries. My first question was, do you pronounce it SPFBO or SPFBO? However, the vast majority of you did say SPFBO, so feel free to roll with either. I have started saying, or I started and learned about the competition and started with SPFBO, but we can jump back and forth. But it sounds like the most of you are Team SPFBO.
I'm just inherently lazy.
I used to say SPFBO, but I got bullied, and now I don't know what to use, so I kind of go back and forth.
It's definitely
See, with the cool
SPFBO.
kids, it's SPFBO.
Yeah.
Yeah.
SPFBO.
Yeah.
It's SPFBO.
Yeah.
Okay.
Crystal was the one leading the charge to bully me. SPFBO. I just want
it looks like like Lauren in the chat is Team SPFBO though, so
She's wrong.
She's wrong. Have good folks on either side.
You're wrong, Lauren. You're wrong.
I had to abandon Lauren. It's too painful.
Okay. Well, my first question is just chatting a little bit about self-publishing versus traditional publishing, and then lately we've also seen a little bit of a swing towards hybrid publishing, where you might go for translations with a traditional publisher or audio. Why did you choose self-publishing, I guess, is the question. And if anyone wants to kick it off, go for it.
I have an interesting perspective on that because I am a hybrid author at the moment. So I started in self-publishing, and mostly I chose it because growing up I was convinced that I was going to be a traditionally published author, in the way that little kids are. I was like, oh, I'm going to be an author someday, and then once I got old enough to realize how unlikely that was, I went into kind of more of a stable career in tech, and that was probably good for me because it's easier to write when you have enough money for rent. And then eventually I was writing on the side for fun, and one of my friends who happened to be in the indie romance community said, you should just publish some of this yourself. And I remembered when I was much younger going to local kind of conferences, and I had heard, oh, self-publishing is the touch of death. It's you never do that. You'll never be traditionally published if you self-publish first. And so this was very much a new perspective for me. And of course, these days, self-publishing is completely respectable. So I finally said, like, oh, okay, I'll go ahead, and why not? What's the worst that could happen? And I was shocked at how well the books did, and then suddenly, in the way that things happen, once you're already succeeding, I got an agent and an editor in the space of probably 1 or 2 weeks. Both of them approached me at the same time. And then I gave over the Regency fairy tales to Orbit. But I have discovered that there are advantages and disadvantages to both sides of things. And self-publishing gives me a lot more control over my stuff, and I can get it out the door much more quickly. I do love my publisher, but it always boggles my mind when I say something like, here, I've given you the stuff, and then they're like, okay, well, it'll be a few months now until we can format it. And I'm like, does no one have vellum? So that has been kind of my experience on both sides. It's also, I will say, this is a weird one that I think more people should know about, and that is that the taxes on traditional publishing can be brutal, because if you publish a translation in another country, and then they send you money, you have to pay they'll often take taxes off the top in their country, and then you have to pay taxes as though you received the full amount.
Olivia, this is something you should talk to your agent about, because I do this, and my agency arranges all of the foreign tax paperwork.
Oh no,
for me,
no,
so I
do have the paperwork. It's just that the governments are very, very slow to reimburse me. I still haven't been reimbursed by any countries. So I've paid taxes on several translations at this point, and all of the countries in question still have a bunch of my money.
You shouldn't be having to do that, because never mind, we'll talk later.
Yeah, no, let's talk later. But let's just say it's very complicated, and it was definitely not fun, and it's ongoing. Anyway, I've talked long enough. I'm sorry.
Anyone else? Thoughts on why self-publishing out?
I could talk from the opposite perspective of Olivia, because I started in trad publishing, and I'm still continuing. I'm a hybrid author, because I'm still traditionally publishing my middle grade books, and I don't see that changing anytime soon, because most middle grade children discover their books through their school libraries, or their families find them in bookstores. It's much harder to build a career by self-publishing in middle grade than it is an adult. But my first two books for adults were published by Pyre Books in America. And I got beautiful covers. I loved my editor. I loved the publicist. But then when I was going through a period with having young kids, and I was selling books in both genres, and I thought, I can't make 2 deadlines a year. I can't. I feel beyond worrying about being dropped. The guilt I feel about not being able to make a deadline is too awful. And I chose middle grade. It's the thing I was going to focus on at that point, even though I always wanted to publish in both. But I thought, I don't want to lose my adult readership. So maybe I'll just write some novellas. Like, I can manage a novella every year, on top of the middle grade. And I actually planned to traditionally publish that. And I looked into it, and it's just almost pointless from my perspective to traditionally publish a novella, because the payments are so low, and the covers are often not as good as what you can come up with yourself, just for a very reasonable amount of money. And so I did that as an experiment with my first novella, Snowspelled, and it turned out to be such a joyful experience. And I mean, being totally crass, it made about twice as much money as my 2 traditionally published books beforehand had. And unlike them, I wasn't having to, repay in advance or anything like that. So self-publishing for me, it gives me this wonderful sense of liberation, because I get to write what I want instead of having to convince a whole marketing panel, acquisitions panel, the traditional publisher, that yes, this really is going to sell to people. It's worth taking the risk. I get to just follow my quirky little obsessions, put it out when I want, put it out looking the way I want. And like Olivia said, the feeling of control is fantastic, especially if you are also in traditional publishing, where there's so little control over almost, anything except the writing itself.
So the best way I've heard it put is that traditional publishing is working for a company, and self-publishing is entrepreneuring, basically. And I think it's actually a healthier outlook on everything, like on the whole publishing thing, because you don't need to pit one against the other. You know, some things work for one person, some things work for another, and you can be hybrid as well. So, I mean, you get a lot more control with self-publishing, and when people say control, normally, you know, people think we're just control. Well, most self-publishing people are control freaks, but people think it's more about the story and the direction that it needs to go, and that's part of it. But I think the biggest part of it is control over your career, because if you're in self-publishing, as Stephanie said, you get like a lot less in royalty percentage. And if you want to do something different, you have to convince people to do it for you. You can't do it yourself. So you can't, I mean, it's not financially viable to invest in ads or whatever. And if people say they're not going to do it for you, then you're basically out of luck, I guess, you know, unless you can convince them to do it. So to me, at least, that was the big draw of self-publishing. You know, it was okay, if I fail, it's going to be on my terms. It's going to be because I didn't do it, not because someone told me they weren't going to do it for me. So, you know, regardless of whatever path you take, they're both publishing, and if you do it like right, both of them are equally good. And I just think, you know, it's really cool to see them as paths to the same thing. They can produce, you know, equally good books, instead of having stigmas over like one or the other.
Can I actually add something? Because you've reminded me of something. The other really great thing about self-publishing that I have not been able to get out of trad publishing is that in self-publishing, you have access to instant data, whereas you do not have that access in trad pub. And so you can tweak your ads, you can tweak your marketing approach, your blurbs and everything, and you can get instant feedback on what works and what doesn't. Whereas if you hand everything over to trad, you're basically you have to trust that they're going to market it, and you will not learn anything about marketing in the process. So I actually think that, frankly, like I think all trad authors should do at least one self-published book, just to get a better feel for the market and what works and what doesn't. I think it's educational.
I think for me, something that's interesting, something that Steph touched on, is that when you're self-publishing, you don't feel as though you're writing to market and trying to keep up with trends, because you'll hear in trad publishing, you'll see, oh, this is the thing that everyone's going towards, is, you know, retold myths or retold fairy tales or something. And you think, maybe I don't want to write that, or maybe I want to write a retold Greek myth, but a comedy, which you know that no trad house, none of them would touch. And I remember when I started out with publishing, I thought, I'm going to go the traditional route. And I remember sending out my book, The Half Killed, and I got several requests for partials and full requests. I would get feedback along the lines of, this is really well written, this is great. We don't know how to market this. We don't know what to do with this. We don't have a place for this. And I'd get these messages back and think, I don't know how to change it. This is the story I wrote. This is the story that feels like me. And I don't know how to change this to shape it to something that you believe will sell. So I think with self-publishing, you have that option to write things that feel that they are very true to you. And often the audience is there. And you can find it. I think that is the work of self-publishing, is finding the audience for the book that you are writing. And that's where a lot of the struggle is figuring, which again, you know, with trad authors, you don't always know how to market. You're depending on the company to do it for you. And then if maybe they don't know exactly how to market this particular book, then you're kind of stuck thinking that maybe my book wasn't good, and maybe no, it just wasn't marketed properly.
I loved The Half Killed. I just have to say that.
And that actually, something you said, Quenby, really leads well into the next question of trends. Like, trends in traditional publishing versus, you know, are we seeing more trends in self-publishing? Do they influence one another? So for example, this panel here, we have a lot of, you know, more, you know, fantasy leads on the cozy or the romance side of things this year. Is that mirroring a trad publishing trend, do you think? And I open this up to anybody who wants to kick us off there and just chat trends.
Well, indie romance has been huge for ages. That was how I first got into reading. That I started finding fantastic indie romance books before I even started picking up fantastic indie fantasy and science fiction books, because it's such a powerhouse, and I think finally traditional publishing is sort of getting with it, because my agent said at the Bologna Festival this year, everyone was talking about romantasy. Romantasy is the new thing. But, that's been happening for a while in indie publishing, although you wouldn't necessarily guess it from all the SPFBO, finalists in previous years, because it's so much down to particular judges and tastes.
Mm-hmm. Alec, you look like you had something to say on that? Maybe? I don't know. You lean forward when something, so I was like, do you have anything to add? I know your book maybe doesn't lead towards the cozy side of things, but I'm just interested.
Well, actually, I found it kind of interesting that I think in some ways self-publishing is setting a trend for trad pub. I mean, because we look at the tremendous success of Legends and Lattes, right? That came out of self-publishing. That's, the current cozy that was, I think it's still on the New York Times bestseller list. But to be quite honest, like we're seeing some Legends and Lattes. I think there'll be more calls in trad pub for books like Legends and Lattes, but there are subgenres within self-publishing that are incredibly popular, that are completely untouched by trad publishing. It's actually kind of shocking to me that there hasn't been a trad pub publisher who's tried to find a lit RPG or progression style fantasy to bring to the trad audience. I think the two audiences have largely kind of almost bifurcated what's really popular within the two. But perhaps we're seeing some convergence with Travis's book. I don't know. It's yeah.
I actually I can add to that, because originally my agent, when I first got my agent, she already had an offer from Orbit, but she did hit up a few other publishers at the time, and I won't say who, but another major publisher turned her down and said, "Oh, we love these books, but we don't republish self-published stuff." And then that same publisher later came back after Legends and Lattes did so well, and I just remember my agent saying, "So you thinking about that self-published stuff now?" And they're like, yeah, we're thinking about it. So I think it's safe to say that self-publishing has a direct impact on trad, because they and
TJ Klune's another example of a romantic fantasy cozy self-published author who is now doing fantastically in trad.
Yeah, I think it's almost easier to create a trend, not create a trend, but for trad to jump on the trend, because the market is so much tighter. Like you have like the big five or big four or whatever that, just if someone starts to do something, then the other takes notice, and then everyone is suddenly like FOMO, and everyone just jumps on it, and then suddenly you have a trend. Because like one book like Legends and Lattes did really well, but if you look at self-publishing, cozy's been here for a long time, and just someone took notice. So, and like Alex said, it is kind of mind-blowing that after Will White, no one's doing progression fantasy in trad for some reason. So there are a lot of stuff that are like just a breath away of someone just saying, okay, I'm gonna just devote myself to this, and this is gonna be the new trend. So I kind of see it like indies are gonna write what they want to write, and it's like a huge open sea, and trad sometimes find something that piques their interest, and they try to jump on it. Some things become trends and some things don't. That's just how I think it usually goes, but there are trends that appear in indie as well. it's just the power of marketing of trad is just like infinitely larger than what a single person can do in indie. So that's why I think trends are created, because they hit like mass market and then they become, you know, well known.
Well, and to be fair, I think I think obviously part of the reason that cozies are having a moment right now is just the real world sucks right now. Like I think most people can agree, like it's pretty rough. So it just makes sense that people happen to be in a mindset where they're like, man, I need some escapism right now. I think I'd rather read something that I know is going to end happily. So, you know, I don't necessarily know that cozy was like, it's hard to say, because obviously, because there was the indie market that had a lot of stuff, and there are plenty of cozies because there is an indie market, and then suddenly everybody finds the stuff that they happen to want right now, and then it gains visibility, and then trad is like, oh, this is a thing. I don't know necessarily that cozies would not have had a moment without self-publishing, but certainly I think self-publishing amplified them.
Yeah, because I mean, publishing is kind of just a lottery in general. I think even for publishers, you know, trad has had, like, I think the most famous story is Harry Potter, right? How many people turned it down? So it's really hard to get right, even in trad. So I think trad are kind of using indie as you know, risk control. So if it does relatively well and it starts to sell, then they're interested. It's almost like a safer bet. But then again, you have the TikTok stuff that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't as well. So it's still kind of a lottery. It's just it's hard to have like a final answer of, you know, this is gonna work. So just read what you like and be happy with it, I guess.
Okay, switching gears a little bit more to specifically the SPFBO contest. I want to hear a little bit about like what, I know we have some folks here who have entered SPFBO before, so maybe kind of think about the first time you entered. Like, what was that decision like? Were you know, was it a hard decision to enter a contest with 299 other books, or, you know, what was that thought process kind of like, and the competition aspect, I guess? And maybe we'll start with Tanny or Trudie this time. We haven't heard from.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start, I guess. Yeah, so I entered a couple years ago, my first book, my first fantasy novel that I published, and at that time I had really just kind of found out about the contest randomly. I think I saw it on Facebook or Twitter or somewhere, and just kind of threw it in there. Why not? It was free to enter and seemed to be kind of a fun time. Really not expecting to get anything out of it, and then it ended up being actually really kind of fun to like just kind of see the progression of the contest and connect with other authors who had entered. And I think I got more value out of that part of it than anything else. And so when I had another fantasy book to enter this year, it just made sense to throw it in there again and have fun with it. I think if you go into it with that mindset and, you know, low expectations, and then be pleasantly surprised if anything comes from it, which there's always some value to get out of it. I think the reviews are really helpful, and just like having the book out there for people to be aware of is huge too.
Trudie, did you want to talk a little bit about?
Yeah, I think the hardest part of entering SPFBO is just getting your entry in on time, because it closes so damn fast. Especially this year, it was like, what, less than 24 hours? I think it was closed. It was super fast. So I think it's going to get faster and faster each time. But for me, I've always kind of like watched SPFBO over the years. I've always really admired it and admired the authors that have been part of it. My first book was published through a small press, and obviously you can't enter small press books into SPFBO. So one of my kind of motivations wanted to go self-publishing a book was because I wanted to enter SPFBO. I didn't really care how it did, I just wanted to be a part of it. So to get this far is fantastic.
Anyone else?
I first entered SPFBO with half a soul, actually, when it was still in indie book, and my first SPFBO experience was, I will admit, a little underwhelming because I entered the book, and then at some point someone said, "Okay, all the reviews are in," and I looked and I was like, I don't have a review or a rating or anything. What happened? And I actually had to chase someone down to be like, did I get disqualified? I don't like what happened. And then they were like, oh yeah, no, your judge had a life event and couldn't finish a review, so you're dropped. And so that was not a great start, I'll admit. But I totally empathize with, when, especially this week, like, oh God, life has been life. But you pick yourself back up, and it was, it's free. You can't argue with free. So I told myself, like, okay, the second time around, I'm gonna enter, and I'm gonna measure my expectations, because I got super into SPFBO the first year, and I was like reading all of the books and like doing reviews and this and that and the other, and then so it was kind of a real deflation to then not get to kind of participate at all. But second year I entered 10,000 Stitches, which was book 2, and that went far better, actually. I got some very nice reviews, and I think it made semi-finalist. And so I think that in particular is a good example of, like, reapplying yourself. Things don't always work out perfectly the first time around, but it turned out to be still incredibly worthwhile. Even the first year, like, I still met lots of great people, and read some great books and stuff. So after 10,000 Stitches made semi-finalists, of course, I was like, oh well, that went pretty well. I'll enter Small Miracles this year, and obviously that went even better. So again, like, it's one of those, like, try again, and you'll get a little bit better each time.
I just think it's amazing that a competition like SPFBO exists, because it's so many blogs, and it reaches so many people, and everyone's doing it for free.
Yeah.
The authors don't have to pay. The bloggers are amazingly, like, generous with their time in doing this. And Mark Lawrence, the mind behind all this, he writes at an insanely fast pace. He's always busy with stuff in his life as well, and just to run this year in and year out, and to have this kind of reach, it's amazing. And the effect that it has on everyone who enters is just insane, because everyone knows how hard it is to start and to write your first, even your second, third, or fourth novel, just to break through and to start being noticed and to get reviews on blogs like these. So just the opportunity that you get, and the reach and people knowing you, that's kind of like the real prize,
It is. Yeah, I didn't want to enter the first time because I was too nervous, actually. My husband had been following SPFBO because he's also a writer. We met at a writing workshop for fantasy and science fiction authors many years ago. And he had been following the SPFBO community and reading reviews and so on. And so he really pushed me to enter the first time, because he said SPFBO is great, you need to do this. And I was like, oh, I don't know, because my self-publishing is my kind of joy outlet. And what if everyone hates it? And I was feeling so good about it because I had nice reviews and nice sales, and now I'm going to feel terrible about it. Or I don't know, I got like all wound up. And he's like, no, just do it. And I did it. And what I found out that first time was it was such a great experience because of what Thiago was talking about, because I got to meet so many other readers and writers, and it wasn't just about, like, I do think there was a sales increase, due to it. However, it would have been worthwhile without the sales increase, because I just got to know so many more interesting people. Nowadays, where I live in Wales, we're quite close to Bristol in England, which happens to be the local con for a lot of the SPFBO people. And it's so great every year being able to go there and meet all these people I would never have come into contact with, who are now friends. And it's just fantastic. It's wonderful to build the community that way.
Yeah,
I entered. Oh, sorry. Oh, I was
no,
gonna
go,
say,
please go.
I was going to say, I had entered my first SPFBO. It was the third one. So I think it was the year after the one that had Josiah Bancroft and Dirk Ashton and all of that. And it was Kay Veloso, who alerted me to it, because she said, well, I'm going to enter my book and you should enter too, so we can be buddies together. And if it goes horrible, then we can support each other, So she threw her book in, I threw mine in. We didn't expect anything to come of it. I know she was cut first round. I was cut first round, but I got a really great review out of it. And I was in what they called the group of death, because I was in with Benedict Patrick and I was in with Alec's group, because I think he was in that year with Crimson Queen.
Possibly.
It was that year. Yeah, and I was in your group. And so I lost to you and Benedict and them. I narrowly missed making it to semifinalists because of you guys. But the great thing about it was all the people that I met and all the writers that I met, and realizing that there was this huge indie world online that I had not really known that much about. And all of a sudden it was like, oh goodness gracious, there's this whole universe out here. So I started meeting all these people, and I was following each contest as it happened, even though I started writing more romance and I had no books to enter. And I kept thinking, well, when I finish another full-length fantasy, I'm going to enter it. So then I wrote Miss Percy, and I thought, I'm going to throw this in. Not sure how it was going to do. I think because Legends and Lattes had just started to take off, and I thought, well, I'm just going to throw it in and see what happens. And then I saw, Small Miracles was in there, and Scales and Sensibility was in there, and I was like, oh, this is a great cozy year. This is fantastic. No matter what happens, the fact that there's so many cozy entries made me feel really good. And then the book went this far, and so that was a really nice surprise after my first time through several years back.
Oh yeah, I was so happy to see like more cozies in here this year. It's like this is definitely the year for it, but it has not traditionally been, you in previous years you submit a romance to SPFBO and people kind of side eye it, but like it's getting more to where it's getting more traction, and so I think it was just really nice to see more romances and romantasy in there this year.
I think last year when Rain and Ruin won, which was
that was the signal.
Which had a lot I think that was the thing where it was like, okay, it doesn't just have to be epic or verging on grimdark or something, like, we feel like we can write any kind of fantasy and it will have a shot. We could do this.
Yeah, and there's always are both part of the same group of Discord of fantasy romance authors, and there was so much excitement in that group.
Yes,
when last year's win. Like, yes.
And like there have always been judges who actually like the romantasy kind of stuff. It's just that it hasn't been a noticeable proportion until starting around like last year-ish, I think.
Because I think sometimes you would see the reviewers, fantasy reviewers, and they'll start their reviews with something like, oh, well, I don't typically like romance, or I don't typically read romance, and you just feel yourself kind of sigh a little, like, oh no, I have to climb this wall here. So it has to be extra good because I have to make them, fight that dislike of romance, and then also have a decent book on top of that. Like I have to do double the work.
And that's actually the better scenario than the other people who will still say, even we've got this whole hierarchy in fiction. I think we all know this literature, litfic looks down on science fiction and fantasy. And a lot of science fiction and fantasy is always looked down on romance. And there are still people who will act as if something having a romantic storyline is not merely not to their taste, but it makes it objectively lower value. And I always prefer it when a reviewer will say up front, I don't like romance.
I will say, I will say I am particularly, though, I always get a little extra thrill when a reviewer's like, I don't normally like romance. Why did I love this book? And I'm like, yeah, I got you.
So I remember getting that with the Half Killed. I remember Esme Weatherax, she reviewed it and she said, I don't typically like historical or Victorian or any of that, but I really like this book. And it felt like such a win because you feel like you're converting people. Like this must be like what door-to-door religious people feel like, that you've converted someone. You've won, you know.
Hello, do you
Like,
have a moment to talk about romance?
Have you heard about romance? I have a brochure. You know? But yeah.
Would you like to have a pamphlet?
Well, we talked a little bit about, you know, reviews and how they're so important, and you know they might actually be, you know, the winner kind of, you know, you've won. We've got more reviews out of SPFBO, and we talked a little bit about this before, you know, the stream even started. But you know, do you check your reviews? Do they guide or influence you in any way? Or are you just kind of hands off the reviews and, you know, pretend they don't exist?
I've actually changed completely in my approach to them. When I first published maybe 5 years ago, I read every review. You know, I stalked my Amazon and Goodreads pages, and now I just basically drop a book out there and I do not look at anything. To be perfectly honest, I didn't even know I'd made finalist of this competition until someone told me, because I just try to divorce myself completely. I found that rather than becoming kind of immune to criticism, it actually stings a lot more as I've actually, you know, written more books and gotten more exposure. So I just don't deal with it, which is just kind of, it feels kind of liberating actually. And
it does. I have a policy. I only read reviews on Goodreads or anywhere else that are 4 stars or higher. And I don't always manage to stick, you know, I will, it's like an alcoholic going back for a drink or something, you know, it's like every so often I'm like, oh God, I'm just going to look at that one star review. I have to now. But mostly I only look at the 4 star and up. And if people say things in 4 stars, because a 4 star is, I really liked it. It didn't totally tip me over, you know, into thinking this is one of the best books ever, whatever. And I'm happy, you know, to read that. I don't feel like my books have to be perfect by anybody's standards. But also those are the ones where I feel like I might actually learn something if I read it, because these are people who clearly like my style, like my kind of story. You know, I might actually get something useful out if I see a lot of 4 star reviews that are all pointing out the same issue. And I'm like, oh, yeah, maybe I'll think about that next time. But in general, I feel like most of the really low star reviews are people who aren't going to like your book if you just tweaked it a little more. And also may not be the right readership, because as people have been talking about here, it's all, I think Quenby was talking about finding your audience who love the same quirky stuff that you do.
Yeah, I read everything across the board because I just consider it feedback. And maybe it's because I've been working a corporate job for 10 years, so I'm maybe a little bit blunted to that. So I just read everything. And unless, you know, like the person is obviously biased on self-pub and will just trash you because you're self-pub, then I won't, you know, give him the watch time or the read time. But I'll just read everything and try to parse out what I can use to improve, because as much as it hurts, you know, in the beginning, I think I kind of learn how to understand like what the person is saying and what works and what doesn't. And you don't have to like, okay, I'm going to jot down every single thing everyone says and I'm going to fix all of that, because maybe the book just wasn't meant for that person, and you know, it's fine. But there are things that if they're recurrent, you can maybe, you know, say, okay, yeah, maybe that's something I need to get better. And I do that, you know, I completely agree with you, Steph, because it's important for me to kind of like gather that data, but you don't get all of it just from 4 stars and above for me. So that's why I read everything. I just try and you know, get a picture of how people are seeing it.
Yeah, I do something very similar to you, Thiago, I think, with that, the way that I approach reviews. One thing that I have tried to be more mindful of when I am looking at my reviews is just trying to like check in with myself before I read anything to make sure that I'm in a good place mentally to be able to handle if there is something that's going to be, you know, upsetting to me, or because that's definitely happened before. So I think just being aware kind of how things are going for you, and if you can handle that feedback at the time is important too.
At the beginning, for me, when I first started writing, I was one of those, I'm going to read all the reviews, and then as time went along, I realized that mentally I didn't like it. So I kept filtering it out because I realized that it would make me second guess everything. Even if I could look at the review and say, okay, this person doesn't like this type of story, it's not for them, it would still put this little seed of something inside my head that was not good and would not have me in a good place. So I've now narrowed it down to the point where I will occasionally look at like the 4 and 5 star reviews, generally the 5-star reviews if I need them for like promotion, like if I need to put them on something, or I will look at the 1-star reviews, because those are just usually out there. They're absolutely completely like, well, I don't like books, and I also did not like this book. They're just completely absurd. So I cling to those because then I can use those for marketing. Like, I don't like books with dragons, and this book had a dragon, and I don't know why that this book had a dragon in it, and I don't like dragons, also books, or Amazon, or anything. And they just go off on a tirade. So those are always fun, and I get a laugh out of it. But mostly the ones that are in the middle, the 2, 3, and stuff like that, those are the ones I generally ignore, because then they'll just, they get to me too much, and I can't handle that anymore.
Yeah, the 2 and 3 stars are the ones that hurt the most. Usually the 3 stars, because it's like, oh man, I was so close. They saw something good in it, but why not more? And then the 2 stars are like, it's just okay. Maybe they're being really sincere that they didn't like it, and maybe there are real issues here because it's not 1 star. So maybe I need to take a look. So yeah, I think 2 and 3 stars are like, they hurt more than 1 star.
Well, there's also a human instinct that means we remember negative feedback, and we are impacted by negative feedback more than positive feedback, which means that for me, I could read like 10 5-star reviews in a row that said every line in this book was perfect and sang to the angels. But then I would read 1 3-star review that was like, it was okay. And I would go, what was the point? Like 10, like 10 to 1. And yeah, the 1 is the one. So you have to, it's like, was this, Tanny was saying about it's so important to be aware of your own state of mental health and your own emotional equilibrium before you make any decisions about how you want to deal with reviews on a particular day.
So I actually do have a similar approach to Thiago. Which is that I do read all my reviews, but over time, and I read them mostly not necessarily to take all of them at face value, but to be like, okay, what mind space is this? What headspace is this reader in? Do they actually like my style? Are they noticing something was wrong with this book because it was actually like a craft problem, or do they just hate, fairy tales or cozies or whatever? And so I've actually, as time has gone on, I've gotten better at kind of sussing out whether a given review is bad because they have something that I need to consider, or it's bad because this book just wasn't for them. And I love feedback. I hoover it up. So having all of those reviews available is super helpful to me, especially from a romance perspective, because you romance reviewers are so great at telling you exactly what they loved about your romance, and then you go, oh, okay, these are the things that make a good romance, and I'll do more of that next time around. What I will say is that as I said before the panel started, something that really helped me get past the obsessing over reviews, even though I read them all, was I once, on the exact same day, I once got 2 different reviews, one after the other, and literally stacked on top of one another. And one of them said, I loved the beginning, but the ending felt rushed. And then the very next review said, I don't know, the beginning was really slow, but I loved the ending. So from then on, I was like, okay, I'm going to take everything with a grain of salt because clearly people's mileage varies. But I think the last thing I'll say on the subject of reviews is that on 1-star reviews that are really self-evidently awful, I book 3 in my series was queer. It was a transgender lesbian romance. And let me tell you, some of those 1-star reviews.
That's like my 1 stars also. I'll whale
Oh yeah.
them.
Oh yeah. So I actually have something that I do that I highly recommend every author does. And that is when you get a 1-star review that is obviously someone taking things out on you that they are not aware of, go and buy a coffee, have a coffee, and then look at the screen and say, well, you still bought my book. Thanks for buying my coffee for me.
I love that. And I also just wanted to put one last thing in, which is after I've said all this stuff about how I don't read the bad reviews, it is actually the one kind that I do care about when I find out about them is if I find out that I've made a mistake that I actually feel is still fixable. 'Cause, I mean, in general, I think, well, even if you make a point, the book's out there, it's done at this point. But every so often, I will say, a few years ago when I had one of my novellas in the Harwood Spellbook come out, Moontangled, and one of the side characters happened to be trans. And there was one scene involving her where I made a really bad mistake because of my own ignorance and because I had been dumb and not thought to get a trans friend to actually read that scene. So the person's her dead name was used, which should not have been used. And when I read a review from someone of Moontangled that said, well, I loved everything about this, but I can't, this is really hurtful. I was like, okay, I can fix that. I do not want to hurt my readers when it's a fixable thing, so that kind of thing, I'm still here I want to know about so that I can do something about it.
Oh, actually, I do want to add something on that score. And regarding things which require sensitivity readers, I think it's also worth noting that not everyone who identifies a certain way is going to agree on stuff like this. And so you might have a transgender sensitivity reader, as I had, who says, wow, this book really spoke to me. This is exactly right. Keep going. And then someone else who is transgender might read the book and go, I felt really offended by this. And unfortunately, sometimes that's going to happen. And it really sucks when it does, because you don't, the last thing you want to do as a writer is make one of the readers that you tried to include feel unwelcome. But unfortunately, sometimes you're going to end up with a no-win situation where really the only thing you can do is do your due diligence, make sure that you have a sensitivity reader of the appropriate kind, and make sure that, for some segment of that population, they do feel seen and respected.
That is definitely great feedback. I maybe want to dig into a little bit, not just about sensitivity readers, but about, maybe your beta readers or, advanced reader group. How do you build that community? Where do you find that community? And kind of, switching gears into a little bit of that. If anyone wants to jump out and kind of share how they found their community.
I actually
No, go ahead, Alec. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that the community that I interact with most actually grew out of the first SPFBO, and Quen's a part of it. But it's a group that we have, and there are a number of really great authors and great people in it. And there's a few of them that I'll give my book to, and they'll give me great feedback. I'm sure many of you know Phil Tucker, but he is one of my first readers on my books, and every time he reads my books, he has some just absolutely scintillating feedback. So I really appreciate that. But that whole community I came to through my early participation in SPFBO. So I guess it's just another example of how this contest can, knit us all together and create these communities. But yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I found community mostly on Discord. I think it's a great place to just chat about whatever you like, and a lot of authors jump on Discord. And similar to Alec, I started making friends, and then really good author friends who started giving me this kind of feedback. Like Andrew D. Meredith was a semifinalist this year with Thrice. He's become like a really good friend, and we started talking. Like we seen each other in communities, but never really chatted. And then we started chatting because of SPFBO, and now we're like super close, and help each other out with books. But I also think it's really important because I know it's really hard as a debut author to, I need beta readers. What do I do? And just grab anyone who will, just read the book. But I think it's really important to kind of hone that across time. So, I have like people who like Andrew, who are super like good and focused on stuff like world building, for example. And not that he's not good at characters, but I have like other people who are friends, like even booktubers like Tori from Tori Talks is also a very good friend who helps me. And we started creating this group, and she's really focused on characters. So I kind of have like, she's my character person. Andrew will also give me, feedback on character. But he'll sometimes focus a lot on other stuff, and then Tori won't focus on world building that much. And so you start creating this group of people, and I don't even call them my beta reader group. They're just my author friends who help me, when I'm writing stuff. So I think that's a cool way to go about it, because if you build community and if you make friends in the community, then it's not like, oh, I'm looking for beta readers. It's just you have friends who'll help you out. So that's how I approach it, at least.
For me, one of my first readers was actually Kay Veloso. I've known her online for, I lament to say that it's been almost 20 years that I've known her. And I trust her the most with my writing, because since we've been together reading each other's things, we know each other's voices and what we're trying to say. And I think one of the biggest things to look for when you're looking for someone to read in those early stages is make sure it's someone who knows your style and how you want to portray things. Because if you just kind of pick someone at random and go, oh, I've heard they're a really great reader or something like that, and they might not get you, and they might read it and go, oh, this doesn't work at all, and you'll second guess everything. But people like Kay, then there are, because of SPFBO, I met more people, but also writers who are in the group that I'm in with Alec, and others who I trust, who know this is how you are anticipating to sound, how you expect your characters to sound, how you usually have the plot move forward, and what your readers will expect from you. So it takes a while to have a group like that. It's not something that you can just like go on Fiverr and I'm going to pick out some people who are going to read my stuff. It takes a while to accumulate people like that. But I think that's the main thing, is you make sure that you have people who know what you are trying to say and know what you want out of a finished book.
Yeah, sorry, go for it.
I was gonna say that actually when I was starting out, it was a combination of friends and some other authors that I knew reading my stuff. Obviously, the friend that first got me into publishing, was helpful on that score. But as I have made more author friends and professional connections and stuff, I've actually gotten to the point where I am like so flattered when another author reads my book, because I know we're all so busy and we all have author guilt. We're always like, I want to read your book, but if I read, I'll feel guilty that I'm not writing. And it's a weird thing, but it happens. So whenever one of my friends who's an author actually does read my book, even especially ahead of time to give me feedback, I'm like, oh my God, that's so nice of you. I feel so honored. But as far as finding readers and getting feedback, when I am touching on a subject that needs a sensitivity reader, obviously I want to hire a sensitivity reader, because that's there's a certain kind of feedback that you really need someone who knows how to give. But if you are just looking to get familiar with queer experiences or things like that, there's one thing I can recommend you do, and that is join the tabletop RPG community. Because I have so many friends who are gay transgender tieflings, let's just say, and like it's the tabletop community is so overly represented with queer people, and it's amazing. And so nothing will give you a sense for what queer people want to read quite like running a game for queer people, because they will tell you, like, okay, I have made this disaster angel who has no gender. And I'm like, that's amazing. Can I take that? And they'll be like, yes.
Well, I'm lucky because I'm married to one of my critique partners, Patrick Samfire, who was a finalist in a previous year. And we met at the 2001 Clarion West Science Fiction and Fantasy Writing Workshop, which gave me immediately 16 critique partners. It was, just an immediate dive into this deep end of community, and also taught me immediately about trying to balance out different reviews, because when you're going around a circle of 17 people and they all have radically different opinions on your story, you immediately figure out there's not one objectively right answer, and you're going to have to find some way to, use your gut instinct to take what's useful and discard the rest, no matter how smart the person is and how convincingly they argue. And after that, it's really been, like everybody's been saying, the process of making author friends. And because of my age, most of mine came from LiveJournal, honestly. And if not from LiveJournal, then from Twitter. And as Olivia was talking about the author guilt and not wanting to pressure friends, what I usually do nowadays is I've got two different groups, sort of, because when I use what I call beta readers, that's actually, it's how I get myself through a novel. Because a novel is a long slog to, get through without any feedback. So I will always have 2 or 3 friends, and we trade services for each other, who will read every chapter as I write it, and they will only give me positive, honest feedback, even if all they can think of to say is like, great spelling. I want to be cheered on until the book's done. But as soon as the book's done, then I need it to be torn apart, by people who love me. And so at that point, what I'll do is I'll go onto Facebook. I will make a closed group only with people that at this point I've learned, that their critique styles work with me. I work with them. And I'll say, hey, does anyone have time and energy? And I don't single anyone out, so no pressure to comment on here. If you do, I'd be happy to critique one of your books also. And so we do these swaps, and it's incredibly useful just to have all these other people who are professionals, understand how stories are made, and will be honest in a loving manner.
Yeah, I think what you said about doing swaps is really valuable too. I think, like, even just looking at it from a different way, like learning to give critique to other people has been so valuable to me, as far as like revising my books and understanding, looking at my story and what works and what doesn't, and what do I need to change, and also understanding whether the person that I'm getting feedback from really understands my story. A lot of those skills I've learned from being a critique person myself and like giving feedback to other authors. So I think it's really valuable, and it's helpful to do that, to do swaps, to build those relationships.
Awesome. Well, I'm getting to the end of my list of questions. Crystal really needs to know how many chickens Quenby has sacrificed over the course of SPFBO, but we'll leave that for some later chat. I guess we'll maybe switch a little bit more to just general writing questions. Like, do you have any advice? You guys are all accomplished authors. You've published. You've made it to finalists of SPFBO. I know some of you, this is your debut work. Some of you, this is, you know, your several novels down the line. But just advice for writers and those aspiring to join and finish a novel. That would be great for myself personally. I would love to finish something.
So the best advice I ever heard about that, I heard it from Clayton Snyder in a tweet. I don't know if he's the one who invented it, but it was embrace the suck, which just means, you know, don't fret over your first draft. If any author showed you their first draft of their first book, I mean, you'll never see it because no one's brave enough to show you. And it's like, it's incoherent nonsense. It just is. And that's fine. But you need the clay if you're going to mold it into something, into like a cool sculpture, right? So you need to get the words down on the page. So just write it. Don't judge yourself. Just write whatever it is. If you feel stuck, you know, just jump off that certain part and continue writing whatever. And if you still feel stuck, then check if you're missing the tools, because what I found is that if you have the right tools, if you have the right foundation, it's a lot harder to get stuck. So, you know, sometimes you're just missing a little bit of theory on structure or whatever, and you don't need to be a planner, but, you know, just spend some time learning a little bit of writing craft, and you don't have to obsess over it like I did, like read 40 books before you write a single word or something, but just try and learn the bit that's giving you trouble, you know, and keep going. It's not, even if you obsess over it and learn a ton, you're still going to write something that's not good, and that's fine. You need that first draft. So yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people struggle with starting because they think they need to write their first draft at the level of stuff that they see published, but they forget that published stuff has gone through tons of revisions, and it's you know, been looked at by a lot of different people, not only the author. Editors are like the true heroes of publishing, in my opinion. And, you know, my book at least wouldn't be half of what it is without my editor. So just, you know, just write it and calm down and trust the process, that there are editors out there who'll help you. There's stuff out there that you can learn, and whatever you write doesn't need to be good, because you don't need to show it to anyone. You have no deadline when you're starting, which is great. You know, you have all the time in the world to learn and hone your craft until you're happy with it.
I agree. I think take the pressure off is, you know, the most important lesson. And it's sort of in two parts for me. And part of that is, don't put pressure on yourself that the first book you write has to end up being publishable. Because for most of us, there are wonderful people, I think, included in this group, who are so exceptional that their first books are great. and I'm very jealous of every single one of you. But speaking for myself, you know, I wrote my first full book when I was 13, and I am so glad it wasn't published. But every time you write a book, you learn something. You learn how to write a book. You learn something more about how to write. If you practice revising every book, you will learn from that process, and the next book will be a bit better, even in the first draft, because of what you learned in the last book. And even now, I've had over 20 books published at this point, and I am still, as I'm coming up right now, I'm working on a first draft, and it's still, I sit down, I feel intimidated. I think, is this going to be good enough? And then I have to tell myself, look, maybe I can't write a good first draft today or any day, but I can write a bad first draft. And so I will sit down with the intention to write a bad version of the scene, because a bad version of the scene can be fixed later. And, you know, that way I've already got one step of the process. And sometimes those turn out to be some of the best scenes in the end, and they may not need that much revision even, but you need to take the pressure off before you can relax and tell yourself all I need is something bad and that I can fix later.
So I can answer some very specific problems that many people have finishing their first book, because guess what? I spent 10 years trying to write a book and it took forever and it's still not done. So here are two things that I learned about why I could not finish that book. And boy, do I wish someone had told me sooner. So the first thing that I can tell you is stop world building, because I spent 10 years world building and it kept changing and changing. And no, I needed to stop world building. And instead, what I did, the first book I ever finished, was I chose, actually the first book I finished was a paranormal romance. And I chose it because I was like, this is popcorn. It's not going to be literature. It's going to be entertaining. I'm going to write it. I'm going to make it entertaining. I'm not going to worry about world building. And I'm only going to build what I need to tell the story that I am telling. And so I didn't have all those notes and all of those, you know what I'm talking about, like the journals of notes. I still have them from that first book that I never finished. And so when you're writing and you're like, you start getting the world building itch and you just slap your hand and you're like, no, I'm only going to write what the reader needs in order to understand the story. And that was how I finished my first book. And the other bit of advice that I can give is that when you sit down to write a scene and you just can't write it, a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times, the reason you can't write that scene is either because you're missing a detail you need and your brain is blocking you. So like, for instance, if you're writing historical fiction and you're like, I'm trying to describe this room and I've just realized I don't know what a room, what a sitting room in Regency England looks like. And so at that point, you've got to look up like, oh, okay, that's the detail I need. I'm going to look it up and I'm going to write it. But the other reason sometimes is because you're bored. And if you're writing a scene and you're going, gosh, I don't want to write this scene, I'm bored, there's probably something wrong with that scene. It's not exciting. And so you need to kind of readjust your head and go, what would I want to read at this point if I was a reader? What would I find interesting? And that's the scene you're supposed to be writing. And so I find that shift in mindset can often help you get through a block on a scene. And those are my very specific tips. Take it from me. Don't spend 10 years figuring this out.
I think for me, the main advice that I would give, and I experienced this over the last few months because I wrote Miss Percy 1 and Miss Percy 2 and a historical romance and several short stories and a novella within the span of about 2 years. And the problem,
I don't know how you're doing it.
and well, the problem was that it got to a point where any free time that I had, I was only spending for writing, and I wasn't reading anything hardly. I wasn't watching any movies. I wasn't watching any new shows. I wasn't doing any hobbies or crafts. And then I realized that writing was becoming a horrible slog because I had basically drained myself. I had nothing creative left in me. And I think my main advice for writers is don't get so focused on writing and taking every moment you have to write and create without making sure that you're taking in something creatively, because you'll find that you run out of things. And so I took November, December, now into January, I've read something like a dozen books. I watched about 20 movies that were on my list to read. And all of a sudden, I started having ideas again. All of a sudden, I wanted to write. All of a sudden, dialogue was coming out of me, and I could write these characters, and all I needed to do was take a moment and actually expose myself to the world and go, oh, right, yes, I hate to use the term refill the well because that's overused, but it really is true. So make sure that you don't push yourself to a point of, I must write every day, I must write every day. No, maybe cool it. And read a book that's outside of your genre, watch that movie you've been putting off, go for a hike, do something so that then your brain can kind of release and work again. That's my advice.
Yeah, definitely the balance. So definitely important for everything. I think not for just writing, just having a balance. We did have one question come in through the chat that I'll quickly throw to everyone. So Laura asks, is there any advice for just beginning to market a first book? I know we'd kind of talked a little bit about how we, in indie and self-published, you don't have, obviously the resources of a traditional marketing team, but I think, everyone's got different strategies and things like that. So if anyone wants to take a stab at this one.
I want to hear the people with 20 books written how to do it, because I only wrote one, so whatever I say is going to be.
Well, I was just thinking, I'm not sure I'm going to be as helpful because I know because of my, the hybrid background. Well, I still would recommend doing what I did, but I guess now I've got it in my head. What I do with every book is I send out queries to book bloggers as if I were querying an agent or a publisher. I come up with exactly the same kind of, very, very polished introduction email where I say, hi, I'm wondering if you might be interested in reviewing my book so-and-so. It is a sparkling 80,000 word Regency fantasy rom-com. And then I do a little paragraph of, jacket copy. I say, if you'd be interested in a review copy, you can use this link to grab it from BookFunnel. And I'd be happy to chat about anything else. Thank you for your time. Best, Stephanie. And I do that for like 70 book blogs with every single book I write. It's a lot of work because you also want to personalize it. And you also want to make sure that you're sending it to appropriate places. So for instance, if there is a reviewer who says, I hate romance and fantasy, they don't need to waste their time with my query and so on. So one great way to start with looking for those is to start by Googling the titles of all the books that you love most and Googling the titles of the books that you think are closest to yours and find everywhere that reviewed those and liked those. And you're like, okay, so we have common taste, or they like this kind of book. And then you approach them and you tweak in your little query letter. You say, I've really enjoyed your reviews of these other books in the same genre. Would you be interested? So that's my approach. It is a low financial investment, which I like. It is a high time investment, which is harder. And I would love to hear other people's approaches.
I would say it really depends on what your budget is. Because obviously when you're first starting out, if you have absolutely no budget, there are certain things that you're going to have to do differently. If you do have something of a budget and you're relatively confident in the idea that your book is good and people are going to really enjoy it, I'm going to plug here really quick. I love Hidden Gems. Hidden Gems is an ARC service that actually has several bloggers on it. So if you put your book on Hidden Gems, which does cost money, then you will by default, if your book is something that people are interested in and they request, you have already gotten it in front of a bunch of bloggers. So that's an option if you have a little bit of money to spend. If you don't have any money to spend, then the three things that will market your book the most are your title, your cover, and your blurb. And so those are the things that you need to focus on, because if you have like an absolutely killer blurb, then your book will market itself. And it's but you have to really obsess over that blurb. You've got to try different things. You've got to make sure all of your crunchy marketable stuff is in that blurb. You got to make it snappy and entertaining. And, you got to put it in front of people and say, like, would you read this book? Would you one-click this book? Would you look at this blurb and go, I have to have this book? And so those are the three things that if you have no budget, those are the things you got to focus on, and you got to make them all really just nail them. And that's what I would recommend.
I can give a little bit of my experiences when I was a debut author. I said that I've written one book, but my novella and my sequel are crying right now because I forgot about them suddenly. It's so weird to like not be a debut author anymore and have more books out. But I think, you know, there's something really important for people to notice, that when you start out, you're just part of the noise. And it does not matter how good your book is. You are part of the noise, and people will not listen to your voice specifically because there are so many other voices screaming at that person. So imagine that, you know, they're in a chamber with everyone just screaming, buy my book. So, you know, hard marketing, especially for unknown authors and debut authors, does not work. It just does. It might work for a couple of people, but you know, you're not going to gain traction with it. What you need to start is social proof, and that's why reviews are so important. So try building community first. Try getting to know people, not so that they read your book or that they review your book, but just so that you understand the community that you're in, so that you make friends, and eventually people will be interested and they will ask you about your book. And I 100% agree with Olivia that if you have a cool cover, a cool blurb, it's a lot easier. So I mean, I always say that I should be splitting royalties with my artist. May he not hear this, because my cover was what, you know, got most people interested into my book. And it's amazing. I love it. But you know, a lot of research went into what makes a good fantasy cover and what do I need to put on my cover to draw people in. So marketing isn't just like marketing, like screaming at people or trying to get people. It's the whole process of what you're doing. You know, you have to have written a good book. It has to be professionally edited. You have to have a good blurb, and you have to have a cover that's not just, you know, good piece of artwork. It has to draw people in and make people open your book and read that first page. And then on that first page, you need to have a good hook so that people continue reading your book. So it's just a whole process, that one thing kind of leads into another. And it's so much more than going on Twitter and posting your book and saying, buy my book, even if you're not directing it at anyone. And, you know, as you said, Stephanie, reaching out to people is great. One thing I did was just send actual physical copies of my book to people, saying, you don't have to read it. I just want to put it in your hands. And this was genuine, because I was just so thankful to so many people, especially like on BookTube, because these people are the people who get people to read books instead of like watch TV or do whatever. So I was just really thankful that this community exists. And, you know, if you have the empathy to realize that that person is putting as much work into their BookTube channel as you are into writing your book, then, you know, it's something really cool to just, you know, look, this is my book. You can read it if you like. If you don't want to read it, it's fine. But I just want to send you a physical copy. And if you have the budget for that, you know, just try and get physical copies into people's hands. And soon people will start posting or just hold it up in a video or Instagram or, you know, Twitter or whatever. And eventually people will start noticing that cover, right? And that title, and they'll remember your book. And then when you start screaming about your book, or when you post something about your book, it won't be the first time the person has seen that book. So you kind of subconsciously already pitched your book to them, or someone else did that, which is even better than you doing it. And now you're kind of breaking through that noise barrier a little bit, because, you know, your voice is getting a little clearer than the other ones that are screaming about it. So, and then when you have something like SPFBO, that just supercharges, you know, and you blast through the noise barrier, because now people know what your book is and who you are, and you're not noise anymore. And now you get like that platform, you get almost quote unquote the right. It's not the right. That's not the right word, but you kind of get that platform where you're seen a lot more, and people will know about your books a little bit more easily, instead of just, you know, just talking about them. And even with stuff like SPFBO, there's still a ton of people out there who haven't seen your book. So, yeah, just try and build community and make friends and and have, you know, other people be genuinely interested without having to push your book onto them. And it'll eventually spread if it's a good book.
If I could just piggyback off that once, I'll be real quick. I just wanted to say visibility is so crucial. And when you're trying to break in as a new author, the worst thing you can do is be invisible. The worst thing you can do is have no one hear about you. So I would advise not limiting how many free things you give away, to be honest. It's like I charge for my books, on websites. They are for sale, but I also give away like 100 free ARCs on my newsletter every single time. And I say, if you get a chance to read it, please just leave an honest review somewhere. And because it's so much more important to me that people hear of my book than that a smaller number of people have initially bought it. I think so many more sales will come in the future if based on the number of reviews and excitement people have seen about it.
I'm just going to add something real quick. Someone just reminded me. I actually wrote a book on blurbs. So here's what I'm going to say. It's called Better Blurbs for Authors, and it's literally all the advice I normally give people on blurbs. So like, I got tired of giving the same advice to authors all the time, so I just wrote it all down. So here's what I'm going to say. If anybody does not have the $3 for that book, that's fine. Just email me or like message me on Facebook. I will send you a free copy. Okay, like you can just, everything I would say about writing a good blurb, I will just hand you this ebook and you can read it, and it'll do the job. So just adding that since I've been reminded.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to say.
Oh, go ahead, Quenby. We'll go to Alec next.
I wanted
to it earlier. Oh no.
Oh, okay. I wanted to say something quickly as someone who has published a whole bunch of books that did only kind of middling well, and now has a book that is doing rather pretty well for self-publishing. The main thing that I noticed that I did different between the two is that with the previous books, I felt like I was trying to kind of fit into what other books in those genres were doing. What are they doing? What do their covers look like? I felt like I was trying to emulate other people. And with Miss Percy, I don't know if it was the pandemic or I don't know if it was because I crossed the age of 40, I kind of went into it with this kind of who gives a crap attitude. And I basically just started saying, here's my weird little book that I wrote. Here's this silly title that is way too long for marketing. Here's this cover that has a cute dragon. Here's this blurb that's kind of snappy and quirky. And I realized that just kind of putting it out there as it was and feeling like I was more selling myself and all of that rather than just trying to copy what others were doing, that really seemed to spark interest all of a sudden, because then people were like, oh, here's this weird little book. Here's this weird little book with this weird little title. And I didn't feel like I was trying to copy what Trad was doing, copy what other successful self-published authors were doing. And weirdly, that worked. And I have no idea why. It may never work again. But I think just putting it out there as here's my weird little book, and here's why I think it will work for you. Here's what it's about. Take it or leave it. That seemed to really work, just that honesty. And also, like Stephanie, I also throw copies out to anyone who asks. If you say, I can't afford it, or I'd love to read it, I'm a blogger, can we have it? I give them away free because it's advertising. Why spend the money on Amazon ads or something that you can't maybe get the algorithm, and just give these copies out, and there's the advertising, there's the marketing. Read it, and if you like it, tell others about it, and there it is.
I am of the opinion that book did really well, Quenby, because there's a dragon on the cover. But I'm biased. I love dragons, so like I was just like, there's a dragon. Okay, bought it.
That's probably a huge element. There's a cute baby dragon. I mean, honestly, any book, just stamp a cute baby dragon on it.
Who doesn't love baby
You're halfway
dragons?
done.
Monsters, that's who. Monsters don't like cute baby dragons.
Okay, well, we are nearing the end of the panel here. I want to give everyone time to plug, their socials, their book. But then I also want to hear, what is the next indie book on your TBR? And this time we're going to start with Tanny at the bottom and kind of work our way up.
Let's see. So the next indie book on my TBR is actually Alec's book. I've been kind of working my way through the SPFBO books and really enjoying all of them so far. So I'm looking forward to starting Alec's next. You can find me on social media. My website is tahernandez.com. And yeah, if anybody, I agree with giving out, the free books with the marketing stuff too. I think that's helpful, but that's all for me.
We'll go to Stephanie next.
All right, the next indie book on my TBR, and this is actually a rough one because I was trying to shuffle my Kindle in my memory, but I have been reading through these fantasy romances by S.L. Potter, starting with Court of Tricksters, which I just finished. I really loved. Her next one I pre-ordered within 5 seconds. So that may not be out till May though, so we'll see.
I haven't read any of S.L. Potter stuff, but I just know that she's a cool person. So
just had to put that out there.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to quickly plug your social media, your website, Stephanie?
Oh, sorry. Yes. I am at stephanieburgis.com, and I am on Twitter as Stephanie Burgis or Instagram as Stephanie Burgis in Wales.
Sounds good. And then we'll go to Trudie.
I'm currently reading through We Men of Ash and Shadow by H.L. Tinsley. After that, I want to catch up with Douglas Lumsden's books. He creates some noir urban fantasy. The first one is A Troll Walks into a Bar. So he's released quite a few of those. I need to kind of get through them because he's excellent. And as for myself, you can find me online at TrudieSkies.com, on Twitter as Trudie Skies. And that's my book, The 13th Hour. You can find that somewhere.
Sounds good. Thiago?
I'm currently reading Deathless Beast by Andrew D. Meredith. My next read will either be the sequel, Bone Shroud, or Philip C. Quantrell's Rise of the Ranger, which I need to start. Because we're doing a kind of year-long read-along in one of the Discord servers that I'm in, the India Accords, and I haven't started it yet. I'm late, as usual. But you can find me online on Twitter and Discord mostly. On Twitter, I'm at Thiago Abdalla. Or if you can find my link tree on my Twitter to get all of the other places I'm on, or a bunch of Discord servers. I am on too many Discord servers. If you're in any fantasy Discord server, I will probably be in there. So yeah, feel free to message me. My DMs are open. I'm always happy to chat about stuff. But I'm mostly not so much on social media because I was launching a book. Now I'm kind of coming back now that all the editing's done, but I'm going to dive into book 3 soon. So feel free to poke me if you want to talk to me, because I miss stuff sometimes, most times. Yeah, I guess that's it.
I am hoping to receive the arc of Phil Tucker's sequel to Bastion pretty soon, which I'm excited about. Also, I guess I can just, the excellent book behind Tyra's Head, Legacy of the Brightwash. I'd love to get the sequel to that, which I hopefully will come out pretty soon because that's been a while now. I'd be very excited if that came out. And funny story, there's actually two, basically, if you Google my name, there's 2 Alec Hutsons in the world, and we're both from the same small town in Massachusetts. But you could basically find me just by doing that.
Sounds good. Quenby?
No, I'm not muted. Okay. I would say probably the next indie book that is on my TBR that I'm really, really looking forward to is, once again, it is the sequel to Legacy of the Brightwash, which is Brick and Bone, coming out. Oh, goodness, when did she say it was coming out? March?
April 25th.
Soon?
April 25th.
Too far. Okay.
88 days. Don't worry.
Too long. Okay. But that is the next one that is burning a hole in my TBR. Basically, as soon as that drops, I will be reading that. And then also I'm looking forward to Stephanie's next book, which is the sequel to her Scales and Sensibility. Those are the 2 that I will drop anything that I am reading to start on. And if you want to find me on social media, I think I am probably the only Quenby Olson in the world. So honestly, you can just Google me and you will find it. You might find some Swedish people who have similar names, but they're not important.
Okay, Olivia.
It's probably cheating to say this, but I mean, all of the finalists are still on my TBR. I set aside a whole week, by the way, guys, to read all your books, and I was like, this week leading up to this panel, I'm gonna read as many of these finalists as I can, and you all know how that went. I need to learn not to say things like that. But I am actually very excited to read some of these finalists. Obviously, the both the Regency ones, I'm so into Regency, and I'm so looking forward to that. But I'm actually like Trudie. I'm so looking forward to your book. I love the idea of just awful gods. That's actually that's my kink. So
thank you.
Yeah, I am online. You will actually find me on social media in several places, which I do not check, because I did a stint in computer security, and Twitter terrifies me right now. So I'm not checking my Twitter account right now for security reasons. And I've reserved an Instagram name, but I don't use it. So the best way to talk to me is probably to email me directly or get on my newsletter. Yeah, I'm going to plug my newsletter. I actually do, in fact, read all of the emails that people reply to my newsletter, and then I answer them with lots of social anxiety. So yeah, other than that, if I get through all of the SPFBO finalists, since that is a bit cheating to say that, I still have A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking is near the top of my indie list, and I would love to get to that one of these days when my author guilt subsides. So that is me.
Awesome, sounds good. And I will just quickly mention for the folks who aren't, or the two panelists who couldn't make it, we have Mysterious Ways by Abby Evans and A Song for the Void by Andrew C. Piazza. And we do have Fires of Forebears. Unfortunately, the author passed away in June last year. But Fire of the Forebears by L.A. Buck, I do highly recommend. And I'll just quickly share what's next on my TBR. Obviously, if Legacy of Bone comes through, we're dropping everything. But I also just got this edition of Adjacent Monsters by Lee Carson, so that's on my TBR. I wanted to just thank you all for joining me on, for me, what was an 8 a.m. panel. For everyone else, I'm not sure what time that was. But thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And best of luck in the rest of the SPFBO contest.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for hosting.